Hello and welcome to the Monster Mechanics Podcast, where we take creatures of myth and media and see how they can be improved. I am your host, Scott Paladin, and with me as always is the Blackadder to my Baldric, Zach Jaquays. What are we talking about today, Zach?
This week we're talking about vampires.
All right, vampires. Well, if there's an off chance that any of our learned listeners do not know what a vampire is, they are a creature of myth and now of much media.
Oh, yes.
That is an undead and sometimes not undead creature that sometimes drinks blood, but also sometimes doesn't drink blood. And anyway, anything can be a vampire is what we're saying. Traditionally, the original version of the vampire was a corpse, was a dead person that would rise from the grave and feast on the life essence, but sometimes specifically blood of usually close family members, and it would cause them to waste away. And then almost always in those myths, eventually they would go back and find the original vampire in there. They would dig them up and find that they were still beautifully undecayed and had rosy cheeks and like red lips and all these things. And there's a whole long list of different things you can do at that stage. You can stake them through the heart. You can bury them standing up at a crossroads. You can,
sometimes you can decapitate them. Other times you have to decapitate them and then stuff holy wafers or garlic into their mouth.
Yep. Sometimes you have to have them blessed by a priest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the original version. Later on, they were the subject of the very famous Bram Stoker novel Dracula, where a bunch of vampire hunters, including the famous Van Helsing, all hunt down Dracula, the son of Dracul, the Impaler, who is an actual Romanian historical figure. And that has its own list of weaknesses, like they can't cross running water. And I think that in that version, Dracula has to have a coffin with soil from his homeland in it for him to sleep in. Otherwise, he wastes away without that. And from there, media about vampires goes in about 1 billion different directions, right?
Yeah. Some of the primary factors of being a vampire is usually they drink blood. Usually sun is some kind of anathema to them, although with certain things like Twilight, they've kind of hand-waved a bit of that.
Well, and to credit, Blade did that first, although it wasn't sparkly, but he could be a daywalker.
Yeah. I think, Blade was a half vampire.
Yeah, God.
Where they got to pick and choose all the best bits.
Yeah, exactly.
Aversion to garlic, being unable to cross thresholds such as doors into homes without being specifically invited in. Their reflection may not appear in mirrors. They cannot cross running water.
Tidbit about the mirrors thing. It's because they had a traditional weakness to silver. Silver is thought to be a magical metal in a lot of ways. And almost all mirrors up until very recently were backed with silver. And so the idea was, they wouldn't appear in the silver reflection because they are weak to the silver metal.
Oh, that's a cool little way of looking at that.
Yep.
What else makes a vampire?
Yeah.
Often they are thought to be able to transform into bats or wolves or into mist.
And a lot of the times they're thought to be like beguiling or charming or like literally be able to hypnotize people, but with their presence or with their eyes or with their voice or something like that.
Which has more recently become a sort of all vampires are sexy kind of trope.
Yep. Sometimes it's just that.
Although if you go back to like the myth of the Nosferatu, they were hideous to behold.
Yeah. Original vampires, quote unquote, like the old school Eastern European early myths for them were all corpses. I mean, they were dead. And so they weren't sexy, but they could be hypnotizing. They could have a power, an animal magnetism or something like that. And there's arguments that like folklorists and stuff will get into about older legends that fed into the vampire. I mean, like there's versions of it that go all the way back. They'll trace it to ancient Egypt and to Sumeria and all these things where any kind of demon that might have a sort of cannibalistic bent to it might be called a vampire. There's also the Revenant, which is a very closely related undead legend. Vampires are big and squishy as a thing. Like they have, the way I described it is they have anti-canon. Like anything at this point can be a vampire if you decide to call it a vampire. Like anything that you can say is true of vampires, somebody else has said, oh no, that's not true. They don't actually do that somewhere else. In fact, on that note, there is a fantastic Wikipedia article, which is a giant collated table of hundreds and possibly thousands of different like appearances of vampires in media and what their powers were and what their weaknesses were. And it is amazingly long. It is I'm not going to say it's the longest Wikipedia article I've ever seen, but it is huge. Somebody has gone through and done a ton of work on this thing.
Well, I mean, there's a new vampire book out every day, it seems.
Yep.
So their work is never done.
Oh, yeah. They're very popular. Well, before we get into, because I have a pitch for you and we'll get to it. But before we get to that, I want to ask, do you have a version of vampires that you like? Like, is there something in like a movie or a book or something like that you're like, oh, that's a vampire that I like kind of subscribe to?
For me, it's always going to be like kind of the traditional European vampire, like your Dracula and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like the drinking blood, the sleeping in a coffin, dies when exposed to sunlight.
Yeah.
And with kind of like a laundry list of little weaknesses and whatnot, that's always been vampires to me.
Yeah, I have to agree on that one. If I was going to say the same thing, like go back to the sort of traditional legends where somebody dies and then they start like feeding on the people around them, possibly without explanation. That's the one I like the most. Before all of this other myth kind of crept, that feels like the original vampire to me.
Another favorite of mine, although it's less seen in popular media, is the Jiangxi, the Chinese vampire. They are corpses that feed on the life essence of of humans nearby. They move by hopping. They can be disabled by tokens or charms placed on their forehead by monks. There's a fun, campy kind of monster when seen in film.
That's cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, so I have a pitch for you, which is our version of vampires. Obviously, almost anything that we could say has probably been done somewhere. I mean, like if we turn vampirism into a disease that was caused by microbes, that's been done. If we made it into an expression of like a god's will, that's been done.
And I think there's that some that are like vampires are a species.
Yep. But they've been living besides humans. They're the predator of human species. Like that can all be done. But I've got a specific pitch, which is that we're talking about a world. So this is kind of a world building exercise here rather than just a single monster.
Some of my favorite.
Awesome. In this world, vampirism is something that anyone can do.
Okay.
It could be as esoteric as you just start feeding off the life energies, or it really could be straight up like cut somebody's jugular and drink their blood. But that it's not something about like, it's not built into, like you didn't catch a disease. You weren't turned into a monster. You weren't like born a monster. Anybody who decides to do this can extend their life and gain back. Like I think even to the point where it might cure disease or roll back the aging process, where it like brings you health and life. And it's done by deliberately drinking the life force out of someone else. But it's just part of the world. And then people who are vampires are people who choose to do this. And you could go a couple of different routes with this idea, where maybe it's about like cursed knowledge, like the knowledge that you can do this is something that it has to be kept a secret so that people don't start doing it all of the time. Or maybe it's one of those things where everybody knows about it, but it's, it's
so taboo. So you don't do it.
Exactly. Or you could go into if you want to be super allegorical with your class structure, you could say that, the upper classes practice it all the time by, literally sucking the lifeblood out of the lower classes. But that's the idea I want to talk about. So the first question is it literal drinking blood, or are we talking about something more wishy-washy?
I like the drinking blood is a part of it.
Okay.
That adds kind of like a gruesome factor that makes it all the more taboo. I think if you're just kind of draining, the life essence, it becomes a little more esoteric and a little less frightening on a visceral level.
Yeah. And on that note, I think that it'd be really cool if maybe at some point in the story, there's a bunch of ritual around it, and there's a bunch of like accoutrements that go with the process of draining blood out of people so that you can drink it, but that none of that's actually necessary. It's all stuff that people have added on in order to sort of make them feel better about doing it. It's all like Like all you have to do is like cut somebody open and start drinking their blood. That's the bare necessity of becoming a vampire. But by saying sacred words and like partaking in a ritual and doing it in a sacred place and using the special blade and things like that and putting it into a golden bowl and stuff like that, it makes people feel like it is established and like helps them assuage their guilt about the horrible thing they're doing. It makes them more removed from it.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that kind of sprung to my mind when you're talking about the upper class doing this kind of thing, was there's a dish called, I think I'm going to butcher the way this is pronounced, but ortolan.
Okay.
Where you basically eat a songbird.
Oh.
And you cover your face with a napkin while you do it.
Yes, I've heard of this. I did not know the name. But yes, I've heard about this where they talk about like you crunch the bones up and everything.
Yeah. You eat it, bones, beak, and all.
Yeah. Bonkers.
And I like the idea that like there's like some kind of ritual with that, like where they hide their faces while they do it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
So you can kind of imagine a scene of like a bunch of noblemen sitting around a table with like cloth draped over their heads and like bloodstains starting to blot the.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. Okay. So they've got that's a beautiful image. Like, okay, I'm imagining those stupidly long dinner tables that they have in movies where
exactly. Yeah.
It's like this huge rows of people, and then you have like a figure in the middle of it that's laying on the table, and then the version that I'm thinking of, like you have channels cut into the table that go out to each of the seats at the table.
Okay.
So they can basically you can start the incision or whatever, and the blood will flow out over the table directly out to each of these people that are sitting there waiting for it, and it will. I'm thinking of like a goblet that's been set into the table that gathers it up for them, and that it's at a certain point during the ritual of drinking someone's blood, you finally are able to lift this out. And I love the idea of the cloth draped over their faces or masks or something like that.
It just adds like a very unsettling factor to the whole scene.
Where not only can they not see what's being done in front of them, but they can't see each other. And they can't be seen, and like it's a really lovely thing. Oh, I like the idea also of them. I wonder, could you like drink the blood straight through the cloth as though it's supposed to be a filter?
Oh yeah, I could see there be like a whole bunch of different like rituals and whatnot.
Yeah.
From like different societies about how they approach this.
Yeah.
When really none of it is necessary.
Oh yeah, yeah. You don't have to do any of it.
There's customs and whatnot for every nation or whatnot.
Okay, so we have one nation. Let's call them the capitalist allegory, and this is the one where all of the nobles have gotten together and have formed this aristocracy, and they gather up young people from the ranks of their proletariat and probably immigrants and stuff like that too, like sort of the unwanted, right? And ritualistically sacrifice them on this huge table, like we're talking about, and that. Maybe in this version, they've I wonder if they're doing this openly as like a, the way we describe the ritual doesn't sound very open. So this sounds like it would be a secret. Like this is a thing that they're keeping from their subjects.
Absolutely.
Where maybe they're telling the subjects that like, oh no, the reason why we live so long, like, yeah, I have been your king for millennia, and it's because I have been given the divine right of kings. Like I have been granted immortality by God himself, and therefore, because I am better than you, I am going to rule you. Well, when it turns out, it's actually because he's been drinking people's blood for 1,000 years. Yeah, that's cool. And then I like the idea of a society like elsewhere in the world, in this same another nation, right, where they have stamped out this knowledge completely, where there are. It's not allowed to be written in books. It's not allowed to be tales of it aren't allowed to be told. Like they don't even allow people to tell vampire stories, right? Like because that is too close to giving somebody an idea.
Yeah.
In fact, actually, that could be the same. That could be the same nation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so our capitalist allegory nation has the secret police, who are the vampire hunters, right? Like those are the guys who call themselves vampire hunters. But what they are actually doing mostly now is stamping out the secret knowledge of vampires.
And maybe hunting the lower class vampires that.
Yeah, they're hunting the rogues down because those guys might screw it up for everybody else.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I love the idea of vampire hunters as a secret police, though.
Yeah, that is really cool. Okay, so in this universe, do the traditional or some subset of the traditional weaknesses apply? Like, is it something that like does it grant the weakness to sunlight or something like that when you do it?
I do like the idea that there's definitely some kind of
Trade-off?
weakness associated. But I mean, with the laundry list of kind of the traditional vampire of just so many weaknesses, it almost seems like, what is this even worth it? Although
so here's a twist on it that might make the weaknesses make more sense.
Okay.
Which is that the more recently you have fed, the more power that you have within you, the less the weaknesses affect you. So a freshly feasted vampire can go walk in the day and isn't affected by holy symbols and can use silver and everything. Like, it's just a normal thing. And it's that when they start to become, the hunger starts to come back, when they start needing to feed on another human again, that they start getting those same things. Like they start to, at first they just sunburn super easily. And then it turns out that like just going into sun will start to burn their flesh and turn them to ash. And like, that's how they start to know that they need to go feed again.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of an interesting idea where it's like once you've committed to this, you can't stop. That's kind of
Oh yeah, I know for sure. Yeah. That you've made a choice and that stopping now will lead to your own death. And then, so like some of the more straightforward weaknesses I think really work for that one, especially something like sunlight is just like a straight up weakness.
Oh yeah.
Some of the more esoteric restrictions and weaknesses, like unable to cross thresholds and unwilling to cross running water or stuff like that, that could be something like maybe the vampire hunters are disseminating those ideas as a sort of
a disinformation campaign, or
exactly, and they may believe it. Like this is something that they've been told.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a cool idea where it's something that the elite upper class have kind of passed down to the vampire hunters, mostly to cover their own tails, but maybe to perhaps weed out a particular group of people that they want taken care of or something.
Yeah. And if you set out things that are well known to be weaknesses for vampires, then you can prove yourself not a vampire by like flaunting them, like,
oh yeah.
Like going out in sunlight when you're freshly fed is something that you have to make sure you do so that people don't start to suspect you. That's cool. Okay. So I definitely like the idea that there are the secret police who are like trying to stamp out all knowledge of vampires, but obviously vampires are a problem in this world. So they're not that effective at it. Like there is still a lot of knowledge about vampires out in the world. Like people are telling each other in hushed whispers and things like that.
So there's probably like some neighboring nations or something that maybe embrace vampirism like wholeheartely. Like it's just a massive part of their culture.
Yeah. They've sort of built it in where, in fact, maybe they've figured it. They've got this system built out where they will indulge in it, but they are sticklers about consent. Like people have to be willing to sacrifice themselves in order to keep other people alive. So like there might be this whole thing about like, what is a life worth and what is my life worth versus the king's life. And so, an old or sick person might say, okay, well, at this point, it's better off for me to be fed upon by a vampire who is going to do good for this world, if they're good vampires, right? Like just because they're just people,
So vampirism is kind of a meritocracy?
Meritocracy is the wrong word because it would imply these people actually deserve what they're being given. But rather more like at this point, the harsher way to put it is that you've tricked all these people into giving up their lives to sustain yours. Like you've built in this like structure that is super exploitative and even has like robbed them of the ability to like disagree with you.
I also kind of like the idea of like a society where they treat this like the knowledge of vampirism as a reward to like, I don't know, maybe like a scientist like discovers a cure for disease or something. And they're like, we need to keep this guy around. He's doing amazing work for our country. He's put us light years ahead of the neighboring countries, so we'll give him the secret of vampirism and keep them around for that long.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, if you have the same leaders for hundreds, if not thousands of years, think about what kind of stagnation that causes in your society. Because, like, no matter how progressive a leader from the 1500s would have been, they are definitely going to be super backwards by our standards today.
Absolutely.
But imagine that guy was in charge and controlling everything the whole time.
Yeah.
So this would be this world where, like, changes happen only occasionally. But yeah, you could see that.
It'd sort of be a perpetual dark age almost.
Yeah, which could actually be an explanation for why your fantasy world hasn't changed in the 10,000 years since the giant mage wars or whatever, is because vampires are controlling everything, and that means that you can't progress. Although by that knowledge, somebody who has been, if you are a knowledge-seeking person, you are looking like a scientific discovery or something like that, that kind of person, having 1,000 years to like build your knowledge and learn all these new things, you could get pretty far with that part of it. So scientific discoveries may not be stamped out the way that social progress might.
I also like the idea that maybe like their feeding cycles aren't necessarily linear. Like maybe they're exponential. Like at first you can get away with just, one every every month or so.
Yeah.
But, 1,000 years later, and you're draining 4 or 5 people a day or something just to keep from bursting into flames in the sun.
Yeah, it becomes harder and harder for you to keep it going because it's a growth path. So at some point, a vampire gets to the point where they literally could not be drinking blood fast enough in order to sustain themselves, and that's probably a natural end for them. I mean, like there's a point where it's just like, well, this is literally not tenable. Like even if we just shoved a pipe down your throat, you couldn't keep this up. And there also would be other vampires probably waiting in the wings going, the king has been around here for about 100, 200, 300 years, something like that. And it's getting kind of, he's quite old and it's getting to be a problem. So let's stage a coup. And, we've always been at war with Eurasia. And suddenly, we've turned things around, and now it turns out that he was actually a vampire this whole time, and he was killing people, and we've disposed him and killed the evil, and now your new king will just carry on for now.
Who is definitely not a vampire, also.
Who's definitely not a vampire? Yeah, absolutely, 100% not a vampire. Trust me. Okay, so I love these vampire hunter characters. So are any of the vampire hunters vampires themselves, I wonder? Are they all being kept in the dark, or?
God, I imagine there's got to be
like the upper ranks.
There's got to be some.
Yeah. Where like you start off as a day one acolyte and as a vampire hunter, and they don't tell you anything. Like they're the ones who are telling you all of the initial misconceptions. Like here's your vampire hunting manual, and it includes things like they can't cross thresholds. And as you rise through the ranks and become deeper and deeper ingrained into the vampire hunting organization, eventually they're like, oh, you know what? Those lower things are myths that other people believe, but it turns out that's not true, so that you'll actually know more. And then eventually you get up to, if you're number 3 or 4 in the organization, and they're like, you've been working for us really well for about 60 years, but you're getting a little bit long in the tooth. How would you like to work longer? And, suddenly you're sitting at a long table with a cloth over your face.
Yeah.
So this is literally just like a world where there is like literal life force in people's blood, right? Is there any knock-on effect of that? Like, is there something else that being true would cause maybe elsewhere to be true? Like, does this mean that blood magic could be a real thing?
Why not?
Yeah. Pulling back to old school magic, true folklorish magic where you like have to get a bit of somebody in order to work magic on them. This could be a world where if you get a little bit of somebody's blood, you can taint it or something like that, or you can cause them ill will because you have access to their very life force. That could be cool. You could have that's the basis for a bunch of spells. Oh, maybe there's like a limited form of like not quite so bad vampirism. It doesn't work super well, but where it's like they take a bit of your blood and a bit of like a larger quantity of like pig's blood or something like that. And you do a spell that turns some amount of the life force in the pig's blood into human life force. And you can use that as like a healing balm for the person whose blood it was. Like it produces like a thing that's targeted specifically for them.
Interesting. Like a specialized healing potion.
Yeah, it's like, and it's like expensive in terms of like manpower, and like you need to use a lot of blood in order to get not nearly so much healing out of it. But maybe it's like one of those things where, the village witch would know this process, and like everybody else kind of keeps it on the down low that this is even a thing. Because definitely the vampire hunters, if they found out that somebody was doing this, would come after you for it because it's too close to real vampirism. And it doesn't actually involve any human feasting on anybody else, but by the same token, it's also much less effective. So it's really only about like getting somebody who's on death's door over a particularly bad hump. It's not like going to reverse aging process or anything like that.
Interesting. Well, that kind of brings me to a question I had. Like, what's the threshold for vampirism? Like, if you kiss your child's scraped knee or whatever and get a little bit of blood on your lips, are you now a vampire?
I think that it has to be enough blood that it would cause damage to the person. Does that make sense?
Or maybe even just like enough to kill them.
Like, yeah, that was the initial threshold I was thinking, is like they have to die. Like it takes so much blood that you have to die. Mm-hmm. But I'm also thinking is I like the dramatic tension of somebody who's been like wasting away over a couple of days because of repeated feedings from a vampire, and then you save them at the last minute by killing the vampire. And I kind of like to leave narrative space for that to exist.
Okay.
So I like, but the idea that you go in and you're taking enough blood that like it's more than gets taken when you like give blood, like in modern day, right? And so they're feasting on a lot of this stuff, enough that it's like causing you anemia and like causing you to actually like your body is not able to keep up with the production. Now, feeding more in a single sitting is probably better, but not you don't need to actually like get an entire human's worth of blood in one sitting in order to at any one particular time. Now you can. In fact, maybe that says something about, okay, so how much blood is in a human is a question I have. How much blood is in a human body? Hey, auto completed. Okay, so the average adult has somewhere between 1.2 to 1.5 gallons of blood in them. Mm-hmm. Drinking that much liquid is like actually super problematic. Like you won't be able to, like your stomach is not big enough to contain this. And this is a world where vampires are not like physiologically special, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's something more about like, maybe it tells us something about blood in this world where like blood doesn't have the same sort of physical properties that it does in this world than it does in ours. Maybe people have less of it in them, or it's more like an energy, or it's more potent, or maybe it has something to do with intent, like drinking some leftover, like accidentally drinking somebody's blood as you're like pulling venom from their wound or something like that won't cause vampirism. But like knowingly drinking their blood allows you to suck the lifeblood out of them. And then it's a lot more about the life energy that's contained within it than the physical blood itself.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure which way you want to go on that one.
I mean, there's definitely narrative elements to both of them, where there's certainly something to the accidental vampire.
Yeah, that is true. I think,
but I was just saying, I don't think that's necessarily a route that you have to go.
Yeah.
I do like the idea that it is something malicious.
Yeah, I like the idea that intent kind of has to be there, or that you it's kind of something that you wouldn't normally do. Like you're not going to drink a bunch of blood from somebody, like more than a quart or two. Okay, most people who aren't Zach are not going to accidentally drink a quart of someone else's blood.
Well, you don't ever do that? Like accidentally mistake the blood jar for your orange juice?
Yeah, I mean, I never go out to the break room at the office and accidentally fill up my thermos with blood instead of water. That doesn't usually happen.
I mean, look, it can happen to anyone. It's an honest mistake.
I mean, if this was a world where people literally had like their blood was different than everyone else's, like there was something strange about it. Like it didn't go into the, like if you drank it, it didn't go into the stomach. It like the process of drinking it like directly injects it into your own veins or something like that is interesting. But it means that everybody's walking around in this world either with like blood sucking fangs, reverse viper's teeth, Or maybe they've got like some flaps in their neck that they can just open up, and they can just like suck the blood down into straight into their carotid artery from it, which I guess implies the reverse, which means that they could just open up their mouth and spew blood out of it.
It's a bunch of fire hose vampires.
It's not even just the vampires. It's everybody in this entire world could at any time open their mouth and fling blood in like a spray.
It's a defense mechanism.
Yeah. I mean, there is a species of lizard that sprays blood out of its eyes as like a defense mechanism.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Horn toads.
Yeah.
They're called horn toads despite the fact that they're not toads, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're special. I don't know. I kind of like the idea that they've all just got flaps in their throats that they can ingest things straight into their bloodstream from. I don't know why that would be the case.
I feel like I would just, like if I was reading a story and that they just wrote that off as completely normal, I think I'd put the book down and just go find something else to read.
Okay, so we'll leave that little branch of our rabbit hole unexplored. Okay, so it's maybe has something to do with the sort of blood as a life force carrier, and that maybe it's one of those things where small quantities actually are like reasonably good for you, but not like enough to trigger full vampirism. So maybe it's one of those things where like in this world, people just have the ability to ingest life force straight from blood. So maybe some cultures, they're like, okay, you can't go full vampire. Like you can't like drink lots of it in order to sustain yourself. So there's maybe a threshold there, but maybe small quantities given to sick people or children or old people or something like that is something that like a community can do to share their health with one another.
You'll never grow up to be big and strong if you don't drink your blood.
Exactly. But I can kind of imagine like what the capitalist analog or allegory, the capitalist allegory of our story would think of as a primitive culture who are just, more in tune with nature, sort of hunter-gatherer level, who are ritualistically sharing their blood with one another as part of a thing to like keep the tribe hard.
So they're looking down on the socialist vampire society of.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, if you're going to have the capitalist allegory, the communist allegory is right there.
Yeah.
Although I guess the communist one is more, you are forced to share your blood with people without your consent.
Which is kind of yet another interesting way of looking at it.
I know a lot of libertarians who would agree with that as an allegory for taxation.
Yeah.
Except in this version of it, they're giving the blood to probably the old and the sick, as opposed to the 1,000-year-old kings and bourgeoisie of this society.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if you want to like draw from more analogies like that, like you've got there's always like the blood of Christ analogy in religion.
Oh yeah, that's weird. Yeah,
which maybe they have some similar religious doctrine like that, where something like that originally sprang from actually drinking the blood of others.
Yeah,
and has sort of been toned down over time, either by the vampire elite or just through the that's weird. Maybe we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, maybe it's one of those things where in some of the versions of the legend, it's like, oh, our God formed us from clay and gave us life by slitting open his finger and pouring the blood into the mouth of the clay figure, and that brought them to life. Mm-hmm. And then in the societies that try to keep the knowledge more curtailed, that legend has been changed, like it's been edited, so that it's more like, oh yeah, he formed them from clay and then
breathed life into it.
Yeah, breathed life or slaughtered a sheep and or milked a cow or something like that and put the milk into the mouth of the clay figure in order to bring it to life. And that the different versions of the myth reflect the different ways the societies view vampirism in this world.
Interesting. I do kind of like the idea that maybe there's like one core religion, and there's a bunch of
offshoots,
subsections and that have kind of branched off depending on how the society's been molded around the idea of vampirism.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, one of them might have, or like something that was like an early tenet of that church might be that like every person has is a vessel for life that has been poured into them, and that you can, and then there's things within the legends about like emptying the vessel or like drinking from someone else's vessel, stuff like that. There's some interesting language in there, which could be kind of cool.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool idea.
And then in their world, maybe God was a vampire, like, oh, that's funny. The idea of the world was not created by a loving God. It was created by a God who wanted to harvest all of the people in it. Like you're all just a farm of blood sacks for the vampire god.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's cool. That's very metal.
Yeah. I could also see like a vampire society where like they want to portray this one, like the king vampire or whatever, as the scion of God by like sort of adapting their mythology to reflect that, oh yeah, like, the son of God will drain the vessels of others and that kind of thing like that.
Yeah, you totally could as a sort of propaganda move. Yeah, that's cool. And then a lot of that imagery could be worked into the rituals that like the less the more discerning vampires, the ones who want to sort of distance themselves from the awful thing they're doing, they take part in it. So there might be a whole thing about like ritualistic prayers and like calling upon the name of the gods and things like that, and saying like, oh, in doing this we are enacting your will and stuff like that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a weird world. I like it.
So are there any other aspects of vampirism that we haven't really touched on?
Well, there's in this world, the other big one that we haven't really talked about is like how vampires are made. In a lot of media, it's usually like it takes a vampire to make a vampire.
Yeah.
And in this one, it kind of doesn't. Like anybody has the capacity inside of them, but in the sense of like, it takes somebody who knows about this process to tell someone else. Like the transfer of knowledge becomes how you create a vampire. Not just the transfer of knowledge, but then like the convincing that it's okay. Vampirism becomes more of a social thing, or like a meme more than a. And when I say meme, I don't mean it in the modern internet usage of ICANN has blood or whatnot. I mean it in the original version of a meme, which is the idea of ideas that propagate of their own accord from mind to mind. And so vampirism as a sort of mimetic threat to the society is something that when you transfer the knowledge from one person to another, it becomes dangerous.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that's sort of the corollary there. Is there what are the other big weaknesses of vampires that maybe they can be slotted into?
Let's see. There's sunlight, in some cases, silver, running water, garlic, holy imagery.
Yeah. In this world, holy imagery is actually like attractive to them. Like it's a whole thing. So silver is a good one. Garlic and silver are both cool because they're sort of naturally occurring. Maybe silver has the okay, so maybe gold and silver, the two sort of known precious metals, the big ones, the big boys. Gold is sort of a pro-vampire metal, and silver is sort of an anti-vampire metal. And so there are certain qualities of gold, like if you spill blood into a golden vessel, it will remain drinkable by a vampire for longer. Like normally you have to drink straight from the tap, as it were. And if you catch it in a golden cup, you can actually hold on to it for longer. Whereas silver might be something that works in the exact opposite. Like wounds made from a silver dagger cannot be drunk from at all because it's been poisoned.
Interesting. This does kind of add another interesting element of opulence to that tableau we were talking about.
Yeah,
earlier,
an entire table
where, they've got
gold.
a golden knife.
Yeah,
and a golden table, or a table with golden inlay.
Yeah, that would be really cool. Whereas silver, as still very valuable enough to be sort of rare and precious, but not as valuable as gold, puts it in an interesting narrative place where it's like something that might be attainable in small quantities by poorer people, basically, but it would still be very precious to them. I love the idea that silver creates poison in blood. It could be one of those things where so like drinking, if you drink from a silver goblet, then like it poisons your blood against the vampire, because some of that metal some of what's in that metal comes into you.
Yeah. Oh, so here's another interesting idea. So like because vampires can be anybody, they don't have like the built-in fangs that we so commonly see with vampires in media.
Yeah.
But like, what if they have like a special set of dentures, of golden dentures or something
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I like that.
that they use to drink straight from the tap?
Yeah. They have to keep them around just in case they need a quick fix rather than the giant ritual.
And so like, there's not really any like set method of like, some will have like a single puncture thing. Others will be like a blade or something on the inside of it.
Yeah.
But every one of them is sort of their vampire dentures.
Yeah. It's an implement. That's cool. Let's see. What's the garlic keeps coming up, and it is very big on vampire stuff. What's the thing? It's called allicin, is like the active ingredient in garlic.
To me, garlic seems like one of those like some of those propaganda elements.
It could be, or maybe it's just one of those things where it really could just be one of those things where, okay, there's two versions of it. One, it really does make you taste bad. Like if you eat a lot of garlic, your blood just tastes bad it won't stop them or anything. They just don't like it. And so you're less likely to be attacked. Or the other version is the propaganda version, where it turns out that like the vampires love garlic. And so you are pre-seasoning yourself for them. And so by spreading around like, oh, garlic's good for you, it'll keep the vampires away, they're actually getting people to like take in more of it.
I think maybe a third option is sort of a confirmation bias where like one vampire is like, I don't like garlic.
Yeah.
I don't like the way it tastes.
Yeah.
And so they're like, the vampire hunters took that as doctrine. We're like, oh, vampires hate garlic. And he's like, no, just me. I don't like it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I like that, where it's just one of those things that just sort of erupted and nobody's completely sure about where it came from, but it was just like a naturally occurring confirmation bias. I love it. But I do, although we were talking about silver and how vampires wouldn't reflect in it because of the mirrors and all that stuff, because of using silver in mirrors. What if in this version of it, instead of silver mirrors like not showing their reflection, it actually just reveals their nature? Like if you see a vampire's reflection in a silver mirror, like you like maybe their appearance is
you
different.
see like the true age as though
or maybe they're stained with blood or something like that.
Okay, yeah. What about the notion of having to like sleep in a coffin filled with grave soil?
Yeah, sleeping in coffins is such a big thing. I feel like we need to try to work it in. Maybe that's not a like physiological problem, but it's one of those things where it's the answer to some sort of security problem that vampires have, where like they feel super vulnerable, like especially the aristocratic vampires of our capitalist allegory are all like kind of at each other, conceivably are all at each other's throats at any particular moment as they try to like bump off rivals Medici style. And so they tend to sleep in like super secure rooms with lots of locks and guards, and like down to the point where they'll even have like armored coffins that they sleep in because that's where they feel most safe. And then it's a thing that vampires do in the world because because they're paranoid basically, but that if they didn't do it, it wouldn't like kill them, except unless somebody else got a hold of them. Like it's really just a practical knock-on effect of being a vampire rather than anything intrinsic to them.
So are there any, like we've talked about the weaknesses, but are there any, aside from a longer lifespan, are there any benefits to vampirism? Like, do they get any of like the classical benefits, like turning into wolves and bats or mist? Do they get like strength and speed?
I think for this version of vampires, it makes the most sense to go for like the strength and speed, and especially like a freshly fed vampire is like twice as strong as a man because he's got 2 people's worth of.
Okay, yeah.
Or actually, they're burning that life energy faster than regular humans are. So they during that first bump, they have so much more of it to use, and so like their senses are heightened, their reflexes are better, they're faster, they're stronger, like they're more resilient to damage because they have all of this extra life energy inside of them. Like they have limited regenerative properties. Yeah. But then as time goes on, they start to feel less and less of that effect until they start feeling the weaknesses that they would get knock on, which means they need to feed again. I think that makes sense.
Okay, yeah.
The actual full-on transformations, I'm not sure how to work that in mechanistically to what we've been describing so far.
Yeah, and they may not be a good fit for this.
Yeah, it could be. Although the vampires being like entrancing and charming could be one of those like early state, like when they've just fed, that they like their brain is working very fast. They know how to manipulate people, and they're able to like call upon the confidence that they maybe wouldn't normally be able to in life in order to sort of like bring people along on things they wouldn't normally agree to. Like it's not full on entrancing, but it like feels that way because you're being manipulated.
It makes them more charismatic.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you a bonus to your charisma score. Well, I think that we're bumping up on our time for calling around to this. Do you have anything you want to add before we head out?
No, I think this is an interesting take on vampires.
Yeah. I think we might have struck onto one of the few versions of vampires that haven't already been done.
Well, I think one of my favorite things about this is that it makes like vampires in this world, they're not a misunderstood creature.
Yes.
They are monsters.
Yes.
Based on monstrous actions.
Exactly. I like that a lot, where there is no pathos where they can sit there and say, "Oh, woe is me! I was struck by a vampire and turned into one, and now I am a monster, and I wear these really tight leather pants, and you can feel bad for me because it wasn't my choice." It's like, no, it was your choice. It was every single one of them. It was your choice.
Yeah,
and that's cool. And then they can still try to pull cards on like, oh, what would you have done in my place? And it's like, not killed people. That's what I would have done. And that's cool. That makes you so rarely get clear cut lines in mythos like this, where okay, these are definitely evil people, and by tying it to an active harm of other people, I think that makes it clear.
Well, I think maybe a long time ago there was like very clear cut, like this is a monster. You hate this monster. But modern media has tried to sympathize with the devil in so many cases.
There's the ongoing process in D&D monsters where somebody will take a monstrous race and they'll make them more charismatic and interesting, and they'll show the good ones. And then most people will be like, well, I like those characters. I'm going to make more like that. And then the super evil monstrous race that somebody came up with 10 years later is all a player character race and has nothing to do with the original evil as it was. Now, in a lot of cases, that's good, because the idea of a creature being born evil and it's irredeemable, I think has a lot of problematic elements. But saying that every person has evil capability inside them, and it's about whether or not they act on it, I think is a much better version of a world where you can have monsters.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Awesome. Well, on that slightly more philosophical note than we intended, bye.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Monster Mechanics. You can find links and show notes at our website, monsterpod.org. Or if you'd like to support us, head on over to patreon.com/monsterpod. We can be found on Twitter at monstermpod, or you can email us at monstermechanicspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your feedback. Monster Mechanics is produced and edited by Scott Paladin. This episode was hosted by Scott Paladin and Zach Jaquays. All of the ideas produced during this podcast are released under a do what the f*** you want public license.